Hello, Rank Squad, and welcome to Ranks FC. It's time for another Champions League preview. I'm Jack Collins, and I'm joined by the Rank God, Mr. Sam Ty. How you doing, mate?
Hello, mate. Yeah, day two, back at it again. Last night's was pretty good. I think tonight's is going to be even better.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting one in so many ways, in that you look at these, and last night it felt like one of the ties was done and dusted, and so it proved pretty much before kickoff. So we spent a lot of time on one game yesterday, on the Borussia Dortmund versus Chelsea game, and obviously Chelsea came out on top. We're going to be talking about that in our Champions League review show, which will go out tonight on your podcast feed and here on YouTube. So keep an eye out for that. Club Bruges versus Benfica in Lisbon went exactly as we imagined it might have done. Apart from Bruges scored, I wasn't hugely expecting that, to be perfectly honest with you. Scott Parker has just been sacked, so plenty to discuss in terms of what we're going to talk about later on. But two good games tonight. I think the split is going to be a little bit more even in terms of how we discuss these ones today. Bayern Munich host PSG with a 1-0 advantage, and Tottenham are at home to AC Milan, where they're going to try and turn around a 1-0 deficit from the first leg. So two ties relatively well poised, I think. Shall we start with Bayern PSG? It feels like the headline tie of the round, doesn't it?
It does, yeah, absolutely. It's the two biggest names colliding in terms of the matchups that we've got. So that's the first ingredient. And of course, it's very well poised. I mean, it's not quite like last night's 1-0, is it? Where, Dortmund had won 1-0 at home and then had to go away. Bayern have gone and done the business in Paris and now get to go home and basically try and seal the job. So this 1-0 is a lot better than last night's 1-0. Not all 1-0s are made equal in that respect. So Bayern are in a genuinely very strong position here, you have to say. And with Neymar being ruled out for the rest of the season for PSG, they're down one of their absolute star attackers. Yes. Whether or not that genuinely impacts them in this specific game, I am actually not convinced. But obviously for the rest of the season, to lose a player like that hurts. So coming into this, I think we're all saying that Bayern Munich are favourites. If Chelsea and Dortmund felt relatively even, clearly the hosts are the favourites here. Just based on the fact that they've got the 1-goal lead. I was going to say they've got the away goal, but they don't. That's not a thing anymore. But they obviously get to go and play at the Allianz now, a very strong sounding board for them, and try and see this one home.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how Galtier adopts his team for this. We saw some very strange tactics from him in the first leg. And one of your takeaways from that was the idea that actually he got it wrong to begin with. The substitutions worked fine, but actually it was the opening gambit that actually put PSG on the back foot from right at the start of this game.
Yeah, I didn't like Galtier's selection at all. Have you got some kind of graphic for me that can help visualize it?
I have a graphic for you that can help visualize it, and we can look at the XG timeline. So that's fun. Okay. So let's walk through this.
Yeah, I mean, look, relatively even in terms of XG. Obviously, a lot of it coming very late for PSG. You look at that red line and you follow it all the way to the 75-minute mark, and they've offered you pretty much nothing. 75 minutes, or just before, probably about the 70th minute, is where they started to make substitutions, started to change shape a little bit. And most importantly, they brought Kylian Mbappe on, who started to provide a bit of a goal threat. Up until that point, PSG had offered almost nothing. And I made the point in the review show of saying, if you don't have speed, then you are not going to trouble Bayern Munich. And that was based off the fact that for 70 minutes, I watched them play in front of Bayern Munich's defensive line and give them absolutely no trouble whatsoever. Now, Mbappe, of course, is a very special player. He is not just a quick player. He is a world-class, elite, quick footballer. So he's going to give anyone problems. But his kind of runs opened up the game, runs in behind, runs off the ball. And it almost encouraged the others to do so as well. Because it wasn't until he started doing it that Nuno Mendes started doing the same thing. For 75 minutes, Nuno Mendes didn't run forward. And he saw Mbappe do it once. He was like, that's a good idea. I'm going to try that as well. And you know what? It was damn effective. So Galtier's initial selection was poor. But by the end of the game, this one felt incredibly even. And of course, PSG had that goal ruled out for a tiny, tiny, tiny offside on Nuno Mendes as he ran through. So eventually, he kind of got to the point where I think he figured Bayern out and how to hurt them. The problem is he wasted 70 minutes getting there, and he only has 180 minutes to start with.
To be fair, it's better than wasting 70 minutes if you only have 90. So there's that to look at one point. But actually, I mean, let's move on to and actually you can see this from the average position maps, right? This is a tale of two sides in so many different ways.
Yeah, so I'm hoping we don't see this PSG 4-4-2 tonight or potentially ever again. You can sort of map it out as you go: left back, right back, centre back. Centre back, you've got the four, then you've got your four in midfield, and you've got your two forwards. It was a pretty poor looking 4-4-2. And the forward two were Neymar and Messi, and they just offered no speed whatsoever and no defensive work whatsoever. So PSG ended up sitting really, really deep because they couldn't get the ball. And every time they won the ball, they tried to play it forward and lost it because Bayern's pressure was too strong. And they weren't really able to get in behind because these players don't want to receive the ball ahead of them and run onto it. They want the ball to feet. And then you look at Bayern and you see them much higher up the pitch. They play with a back three, which I do not expect tonight just because of injuries and suspensions. But the back three really worked on this occasion. They managed to sweep up around the defensive line, around the halfway line really nicely. The midfield's nice and populated, and they won a lot of second balls in there. Kimmich and Goretzka were very, very good. And the wing backs were responsible for most of the attacking play. They swung a lot of crosses in, and eventually it was a wing back to wing back combination that basically scored them the goal, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing. We kind of can come on to the idea of what these sides are going to look like tonight. We'll skip past the slide for now and we'll come back to that one. But I'm going to move us out of the way so that people can see this properly. But these are the expected lineups according to the good people at Who Scored. We must give their credit for these. And I think it answers a lot of questions. We're not going to see that Bayern three at the back, but we had a question from Clay who said, will PSG use their three at the back? I think the answer is very much yes.
Yeah, they've sort of worked their way back to the back three, haven't they, over the last 3 weeks since the Bayern game? They sort of started to work their way back towards it. They departed from it after a full half season of really successful football, moved into the 4-4-2. It really didn't look good at all. Went into the biggest game of their season so far with it, got punished, and have now kind of finally figured out that that's probably not going to work. So even with an injury to Kimpembe, I'm expecting them to move into the back three here. And even without Hakimi, who's unavailable.
Well, he's not unavailable. He's in the squad. This is a recent development I thought I would update you on. There are some extenuating circumstances surrounding Achraf Hakimi at the moment. He has allegedly been involved in a rape case, but he is in the PSG squad. Obviously, we don't know the details of that, so I'm not going to go into it. But he has been included in the squad, and he is back from injury in terms of his footballing status right now.
Well, that's just a massive benefit. And obviously, he's the perfect wing back. So let's see how that one shapes out. I mean, that might give them the ability to play Mukiele at right centre back and move Pereira back into midfield, where he was very good against Bayern Munich in the first leg. He was actually PSG's best and most effective player. But yeah, we'll have to see exactly how that shakes out. Either way, you get Nuno Mendes and Hakimi at wing back, just flying forward, hopefully. Mbappe pushing and trying to work on the last line of the defender. Him and Upamecano, they must know each other so well from training for the France national team. This is going to be a lot of fun indeed. And when Mbappe takes the top off the defense, obviously Messi has a bit more space to play in the middle. So I really hope we see this shape because it will give PSG a real chance here. What I find interesting is, I'll just continue quickly to say that last game in the first leg, we saw Bayern Munich use a back three and PSG use a back four. I expect to see the opposite. I expect to see one using one and one using the other this time around, which is always fun.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of touch quickly on Matthijs de Ligt, who is really starting to feel at home, I think, in this Bayern side. He was really, really impressive in what was an unconvincing win, I suppose, at the weekend against Augsburg. But he was at one end clearing things off the line and then at the other end scoring goals. So, a very, very impressive performance. And that partnership between him and Upamecano felt very, very strong in the first leg, obviously in a slightly different shape. But I feel like it's starting to really grow into something that Bayern can rely on. And that's good news from their perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they had the perfect shape in the first leg defensively because they used the back three. They put de Ligt in the middle of it and he sort of just patrolled the central column. And then they had Benjamin Pavard on the right-hand side and they had Upamecano on the left, although they did actually quite a lot of the time, these three ended up in different positions and switched over for 3 or 4 minutes. I half thought at one point that they got so bored because they weren't having to do any work that they started switching just for fun, but I doubt that was the case. But Pavard is now suspended, so they can't really use the back three unless they take Daley Blind and put him on the left centre-back slot. But he is also pretty slow, and that's the one knock on de Ligt is he's quite slow. Like the turning circle isn't quite there. So if you're up against Mbappe, I'm not sure the right move is to put Daley Blind and De Ligt at centre back. So I'm kind of expecting the back four here as a result of that. And this is a big, big game for Upamecano, because not only does he have to cover his zone, but I think he might end up having to cover a few other people's zones as well. Obviously, Fonzie and Cancelo are going to go forward and forward and forward, and De Ligt might be susceptible to a bit of pace, of course.
I enjoyed this from Dwarek, who says, will Stanisic or Pavard get a start ahead of Cancelo? He was on the bench at the weekend. Also, what's next is Cancelo. He feels like he's unhappy at Bayern too. It hasn't been the smooth kind of sailing that everyone expected when he waltzed in on his first start and picked up that assist. Everyone was like, oh, right, he's back. He has dropped in and out recently, and it's not been all that comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of rotation at in this team anyway, of course, but it hasn't been a perfect start, not at all. I do remember him starting really well, and then he got dropped for a game. And do you remember we had that report that Cancelo wants to play every single game, and that when he gets dropped, he's not happy? Well, he basically missed like the second game or something. I was like, maybe that's it. Maybe he's going to burn Julian Nagelsmann's house down from here now because he's missed one game. Maybe this is just who he is. But we know that Pavard isn't going to play because he's suspended. He got a red card in the last game, so that he can't play. And Stanisic he's pretty good, but like he's not the player for this occasion, is he?
I don't know. I never deign to sort of question the ideas of what Julian Nagelsmann will do next. So I think that's a fair point. I want to come back to this, which was the touch maps of Messi and Mbappe. And I also want to use it as an opportunity to answer this from Jerry, who says, I've heard a lot of pundits say that PSG have a better chance to win without Neymar. Do you agree? I would caveat this with, obviously, Neymar is one of the most talented players in the entire world. And therefore, teams without him tend to be worse than teams with him. But in this exact occasion, I would maybe suggest that the shape that PSG deploy when he's not there, the front two with Messi and Mbappe, and then the fact that it's not defending with 7, it's defending with 8, might just benefit them in this exact regard.
Yeah, on this specific occasion, it's so weird, such a weird thing to say. We're both on the same page here. It just doesn't feel right. But on this specific occasion, like it might not impact them too much. I'm not going to say benefit. I say it might not impact them too much. And I put these touch maps together to show the difference between them, because I think it's really important to illustrate the kind of impact that Mbappe had. Now, Mbappe's touch map takes place over the course of 20 minutes or so. Messi's over the course of 90. So that explains the volume of touches in terms of the difference. But also Messi, look at the positions and the areas of the pitch that Messi is getting on the ball and where he's touching the ball. It's really, really deep. It's all in front of the defence, as I said. Mbappe doesn't touch the ball in his own half. Mbappe only touches the ball in the opposite half. And look at that cluster there at the top left of the box. That is him getting in behind. That is him running at Upamecano. That's him hitting the byline. That's him combining with Nuno Mendes on the left and getting through. And that is what you need to do against Bayern Munich, because if you let that defensive line creep up and you play in front of them, and that constricts the amount of space you've got to play in, and then you've got Joshua Kimmich and Leon Goretzka in there slamming about, crushing you and picking up all the second balls, you are screwed. You are absolutely screwed. You need to make this pitch as big as you can and try to get in behind the defense, test De Ligt if you can, but get in behind Upamecano as well, keep him honest. Otherwise, Bayern will just like shrink you in here into this tiny little space and just crush you. So I think they've learned that lesson.
A bit like this.
They have a bit like that, yeah. So I think they've learned this lesson. Look, obviously Mbappe was injured for the first game, and in a way, Galtier's hands were tied on that specific move. But he didn't work hard enough to find speed in other areas of the pitch and release it forward and use it in appropriate ways. It took for Mbappe to come on for the other quick players to even bother playing. So this is really important. And this is what gives me some level of optimism here for PSG. And it means that it doesn't really matter if they're home or away. Mbappe is Mbappe. He plays amazing football when the big stage comes calling. And tonight is a huge stage.
Yeah. We'll come on to the other game in a second, but a couple of questions here. This from Monty said, really found Nagelsmann's 3-1-6 in attack interesting that he was trialing a few weeks ago. This is not the first time we've seen him deploy something like this, where he starts playing wing backs who are just orthodox wingers and not asking them to do the defensive responsibilities of fullbacks. So we've seen him kind of do this before, but I'd be very surprised if he deploys it tonight.
Doesn't seem like the night for it. Again, like he's a mad scientist, but just, yeah, try and rein it in a little bit if you can, Nagelsmann. Like, he'll be able to pick a more regular game plan to win tonight, I'm sure. The one thing we didn't mention just before we round off and go to the next game is that on that predicted 11 for Bayern Munich is Sadio Mane's name. And obviously he got injured before the World Cup. And that was very, very sad for him. Missed the World Cup and missed a good chunk of games. But Mane could return tonight. Maybe not from the start. Maybe from the start. We don't know yet. But he's in the mix. And that just adds another name to it because Leroy Sané's still knocking around in there. And, you know, it's going to be very interesting to see what they look like in attack. This looks a lot more like a Nagelsmann front four than maybe the one that he's been able to deploy recently.
Yeah, I mean, that leaves Gnabry and Sane on the bench, which are options that I think many clubs across the world, and by many clubs, I mean every single club across the world, would kill to have in reserve. Most clubs would kill to have as their starting two. So there's a lot of talent here and a lot of ability to change the game off the bench for Bayern as well. Last question here on this one from Siddharth, who says, if PSG fail, what kind of managerial appointment do PSG go for? It feels like the answer is going to be Zidane. Whether that's the right answer or not is a different question. This is a massive game, though, for PSG. And I think kind of coming off the back of this question into a broader topic, it kind of feels like one of those that's make or break, because you get to this point in the season, and we've seen this before from PSG, where they suddenly collapse on the Champions League stage. And aside from the season that they got to the final against Bayern, it's kind of felt like this has been curtains for every manager who's come in, and we're getting to a point now where Galtier's reign is going to be defined by tonight. We talked about this for Chelsea and Potter last night, that it felt like a defining game. Chelsea got through that. Now, whatever happens next, fine, but they got through a defining game. This feels like a defining game for PSG as well.
It absolutely does. Every knockout stage Champions League game for the last 5 years has been a defining game for PSG, because they are so public in the way that they obsess and yearn for this trophy. So when you talk about that, and when you set that as your ultimate number one and perhaps only goal at times, when you don't make it and when you fall at the round of 16 or the quarterfinals, and they've done that far too many times, it's a massive disappointment. So of course we make more of it, because we know it's their objective. And so we know that they failed in their objective. So that's why it becomes make or break, you know. For most other managers, it's like, well, you didn't win that one, but you've got other tournaments. For PSG, it's like, did you win the Champions League? No, then you failed. It's sometimes it does feel as simple as that. And that's harsh and it's mean, but they almost set themselves up for it, Jack. It's kind of their own fault. I don't know where they go from here other than Zidane either. But I think that, you know, we're projecting Zidane as a PSG manager here because of the personnel that they currently have. You know, we think that, you know, Mbappe, Messi, Neymar, you know, that would suit Zidane. He's obviously a big name, big ego manager. He's done this before.
Will they be there?
What the hell does this front line look like next year? Does Messi play for Inter Miami and Neymar play in Qatar or something? Like genuinely, no clue. So the personnel almost inform the managerial choice at a point, and it's just a little early to say.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's come on to Spurs against AC Milan. Now, this is at the perfect level stage, isn't it? This is the point. So we made this last night. We'll make it again. 1-0 to the away side is level in the tie at halftime, as far as I am concerned. And the first leg of this was a little bit weird in so many ways. Both sides look relatively comfortable, which I think is something you don't often say. Spurs sort of lacked any real attacking threat, but they created a few bits and bobs off set pieces. There were moments in the game, but generally I thought AC Milan dealt with that front three well. The midfield too were not what you'd expect. Obviously, Oli Skip played in this game, and we saw the two youngsters generally hold their own relatively well. But Milan will be cursing themselves that they are not 2-3-0 up on this. Obviously, Shalda Ketelara missed a really, really good opportunity, and Malik Chow missed a big header as well. He was excellent generally, but you look at the way that this game panned out, and actually we'll go back to our slides and to the XG timeline.
I've never seen an XG timeline form almost a perfect rectangle before.
No, it was like, oh, Milan scored and then nothing else happened. Like, okay, cool, right? Nothing, like, very strange. Obviously, small chances here and there, but a really odd jump in terms of how it went. The goal obviously was a major bit, and the fact that jumps above one is because there were two very good opportunities, not just one, that Milan ultimately scored from on the rebound. But just it was a game where chances were at a relative premium. And it's going to be very interesting to see how this one pans out tonight. I think generally, considering the way that the Spurs have to go for it. The problem with trying to work this out is the idea that generally you have no idea, Sam, at the moment, what Spurs are going to turn up.
No, I really don't. I mean, Antonio Conte is going to, he's back in action. He says he feels good. That's one, spanner in the works for everybody. Like, no one really knows what this Tottenham team is going to do on a weekly basis here. They didn't know what they were going to do on a half-to-half basis under Conte. They got better under Stellini, obviously, but Conte's back now. Son sat there in the press conference, bless his little heart, going, I'm really, really happy to see the manager next to me in the chair once again. Like, they're really pleased to have him back. But what impact this has, I don't know. I just have no clue whatsoever. They're obviously going to have to be less insipid from an attacking standpoint than this. And at home, that's actually no guarantee. I've sat in that stadium a couple of times this season, once on a Champions League night, and it's taken them again another 60 minutes to really get going. So I sort of fear for them a little bit in that I suspect maybe a slow start happens and occurs. And if Milan can do exactly what they did in the first leg here, that puts them in all sorts of trouble.
Yeah, I mean, let's come on to the old predicted lineups and we'll pull them up big so you can have a look at them. But unlike in Munich tonight, it does feel like this is very much going to be 2-3 at the back formations playing against each other. It's mirror formations in many ways, although I'm not 100% sure that Leao is going to play on the right-hand side. That would surprise me. But generally, I think you look at these and think, where are the big battles? And we'll talk about Harry Kane coming up against Simon Kjaer again in a minute. So I'm going to leave that one be for a minute. But there is a question here from Jack who says, does Son get dropped for Richarlison again? Feels like the type of important match to be entrusted to Son, but he's been so poor this entire season. Jack also said that he totally forgot Sam was his profile picture.
Jesus, so Jack.
That's nice. But obviously Son was in that press conference and yet, Richarlison, I think, starts it. I just get that feeling that they will look to utilize him, considering the Son hasn't been great. That said, as a kind of flip side of that, it was Son's set piece deliveries that caused Milan the most headaches in the first leg. So there is that to consider as well.
Yeah, can you take that comment off the screen, please? It's freaking me out. Thanks, Jack. Look, Son's not been very good all season, as Jack says. And so I think for the last couple of weeks, since Richarlison has essentially returned to fitness, we've been asking the question, like, when is he going to step into this team? When is he going to step into this team? And kind of feels like 50-50 as to whether or not he goes in for Son or Kulusevski, right? Because Kulusevski hasn't had the greatest season either. Son obviously is very entrenched in the team, and again is a big game player. But Tottenham didn't get a whole lot of anything in the first leg, so that's kind of out the window. I'd be surprised if Richarlison doesn't earn himself a start here. I just couldn't pick which one of the two he steps in for. It's massive for Spurs that they get Højbjerg back. He was suspended for the first leg, I think, wasn't he? So it had to be Skip and Sarr with Bentancur injured. So Højbjerg can come back in there, and that feels pretty big to have him in the middle. But whenever you play Milan, it's all about the left-sided combo and whether or not you can live with it, right? It's Theo Hernandez up and down the flank, on the chalk, on the outside line, or stepping in towards the central zones, and Rafa Leao combining with him, moving with him. And it's a big, big, big game for Emerson Royale, as usual. And Christian Romero is going to have to behave himself too, because he's the kind of player that likes to step forward and be aggressive and try and engage very high up and very firmly. And if you get that wrong against Leao and Theo, that's not good.
Yeah, you're going to be in trouble. I mean, there's a couple of questions about this. Dwarka says Skip and Sarr both had a great game at San Siro. They did. Who should get benched for Højbjerg tonight, in your opinion? Obviously, the predicted lineups have Skip holding his place. I'd be surprised if it wasn't.
Yeah. I mean, Sarr is still extremely new to Tottenham Hotspur football, right? I guess I was going to say Tottenham football. That's not quite true. He's played a fair bit of Liga, but just hasn't played that much. Skip is just much more familiar with this team, with the setup, with the manager, with the teammates. So, yeah, I mean, it's not an ideal choice, is it? They're both. It's not who you'd pick, but I would also back Skip to keep his spot.
I think something is really interesting in terms of these two teams and the way that they set up, and to kind of pull this in. look at this as an average position map, because I don't think I've ever seen anything like this. It's just everyone in one zone. There is like no stretching whatsoever. And actually some of the bits and bobs that you look at, and the way that Giroud dropped, obviously that left attacking midfield spot is Rafa Leao. So he's obviously the one that looks to stretch. But you kind of expect that kind of map from where Spurs are. And yet Harry Kane pinned himself, or was pinned, if you will, by Simon Kjaer in the first leg. And just to take a quick look at his touch map, this is quite low frequency for Harry Kane. And it was one of those games where he had almost no joy whatsoever. A lot of those touches in the box were actually headers from crosses, were bits where he was trying to get his head on the end of set pieces. It really did kind of feel in that way that this was a game where Milan stopped Kane and then they stopped Spurs because they bottled him up. Charles did a really good job on both Kane as he drifted across to help Kjaer and on Kulusevski. And Son just couldn't get going whatsoever. And generally, I think across it just felt like one of those games where Spurs felt completely impotent because Kane was completely taken out of their attack by Simon Kjaer's performance.
Yeah, I'm struggling to recall a touch map from a lone forward that has that massive big gap with nothing in it in what we would call zone 14. You know, just the D area on the penalty area and just around that, like the bit where you would kind of expect him back to goal to receive a few passes, a few wall passes, whatever, a few 1-2s, like whatever it is, you'd expect him to be backing into a defender right in that bit where there's absolutely nothing, and playing 1-2s and stuff, and playing like bounce passes, and there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing, which is really concerning.
Well, it's a testament to the job, I think, that Simon Kjaer did, because that felt like a real captain's performance. There's a couple of questions here, so I'm gonna come away from. I keep doing that. I don't want to do that screen. I'm gonna come away from that and just kind of deal with a few of these. Sid says, "Why have Spurs not been able to utilize Danjuma? He could have been a bright spark." And it's a really good question that I haven't thought about at all.
I forgot he was there. I really forgot
it was probably an issue.
And even with Richarlison injured, he hasn't really been able to work his way into the system. I mean, I don't know is the answer, unfortunately. Maybe Stellini doesn't like him. I mean, who knows what it is? Maybe his level is really poor in training. January transfers can be a bit of a punt sometimes, and obviously players can take a little bit of time to get up to speed with certain systems and tactics and formations, and get up to speed with their teammates. It might be that he just hasn't quite meshed yet, and it's really hard to do that in the middle of a season. But unfortunately don't really have a very good answer for that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of questions about Tomori. This from Jerry says, is Tomori or out of form?
Both.
And Dwarka also said, why is Tomori underperforming this season compared to last year? I think that's where we're at, isn't it? He gave away a really, really dumb penalty at the weekend against Fiorentina and kind of got run ragged by Jonathan Okone most of the game. And I had imagined that if he does play, and I'm not 100% sure he will, but if he does play, then that's an area that Spurs are probably going to look to attack. And considering how good Tomori was last season, that feels like a weird statement.
Yeah, for sure. He was really, really impressive last season. 18 months, basically. 18 straight months of brilliant performances. He signed on loan in January and then obviously made it permanent and then did a full season and was excellent. And then, yeah, it's just kind of, I don't know what's happened. It's kind of caught up with him. He got a few looks for the England squad, didn't he, before the World Cup? Southgate called him up and reportedly just wasn't very impressed by his level. And the same was said for Ivan Toney. So it's kind of been dating back all the way through to October into November, missed the World Cup, missed his shot. Then he definitely got injured, obviously, earlier this year and has missed some time. So again, I've used this phrase a lot, but like, it's a big occasion. And is this really the occasion that you take the gamble on Tomori refinding his form and his fitness when you've got Malik Chow, you've got Pierre Kalulu, and you've got Simon Kjaer? It's probably not, is it? It's probably not the time.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Aiden has a couple. He says, he started with saying Tottenham should play with Royale left wing back and Porro right wing back. I think that would be a bad idea. Chucking Pedro Porro in against Theo Hernandez and Teo Hernandez and Rafa Leao, when he hasn't really settled in at Spurs yet, I think is a really dangerous game. I really like Pedro Porro, but this feels like an Emerson Royale game all day long.
And also, it's definitely an Emerson game from the right as well, because
100%.
He's really limited in possession. And if you're going to play a wrong-footed wing back at this point, in 2023, they're going to have to be very, very comfortable in possession, because they have to invert, they have to come inside, they have to play as like a quasi midfielder. And Emerson is just none of those things. So you have to be really careful about which fullbacks you kind of push into those areas. Remember that Milan's great threat is down their left. So if you have to pick your best right-sided defender and you play him.
Yeah, and that is Emerson Royale's strength. He's a good defender. It's always been part of his game that he's been most impressive at. It's the bits where he's on the ball in the final third that I think Spurs fans have become more and more frustrated with. Aiding caveat by saying, or 5-2-2 with Son left wing back. Someone tracks back for Perisic anyway, but now we can get rid of Perisic. Plus the extra midfielder could help cover him. It wouldn't completely surprise me this, but I don't know if he will change the system at this point with the season on the line.
Feels pretty bold sticking Son at wing back in the Champions League second leg. I can see the logic in it for sure. I just feel like it's probably one too far for him at this point. What has happened to Perisic?
Yeah, I don't know. It's one of the great questions of this season. He was brought in to become an immediate upgrade at left wing back, and it just kind of hasn't
good for
worked.
A bit. He was good. I think he was good all the way through, and then I think he might have exhausted himself at the World Cup. That's my theory. But you can never rule out the fact that, like, at some point, as good a condition as he's in, he is like 35 and he plays wing back. Like, it's going to lose a step at some point. I fear it may have happened, but I'm not 100% convinced, because I'm willing to attribute some World Cup burnout. But either way, it's like, add it to the list of problems for Tottenham at the moment. And the last thing they thought they were going to have to deal with this season, amongst a litany of issues, is this like proven quality, like brilliant wing back is now underperforming, despite the fact that for the last 10 years he's been amazing. Why us? Why Spurs?
Exactly. Right, last question from Avanav, who says, if hypothetically Spurs get battered, would you consider sacking Conte? He's not doing any wonders in the Prem, and a Champions League battering could tempt Levy to sack him and bring back Poch. One, I don't think Spurs are going to get battered tonight. It's not really been what AC Milan have done of late. They haven't really put teams and gone, oh, we'll absolutely put you to the sword, or teams of great quality anyway. But I don't mind the idea of, if Spurs go out tonight, them starting to make preparations for next season. Obviously, Conte gets to the end of the year. It looks increasingly like he's going to walk away from the Spurs job at the end of the season. I'm not 100% sure, actually, if there's much point in him carrying on if Spurs were to be knocked out right now of the Champions League, because are you not better getting set for next season? That said, there's obviously this top four
Fourth
battle.
Is still on the line. It's still on the line, I mean, I'm with you. Yeah, I agree. They probably won't get battered, but there's a very, very logical strain of thought here, which is like, what if he's not here next season? What are we doing? What's the point? But I think you only pull the plug on that sort of thing and start preparing for next season, which, by the way, is still like 12 to 13 games away, whatever it is. It's quite far. If there's nothing in this season for you, and you might not have a lot of faith in their top four charge. I don't, and I don't think you do either, and I don't think Spurs fans do, but technically it is there for them.
Yeah, it's a difficult one to kind of balance, isn't it? But I can understand, especially with the kind of turgid nature of some of the football that we've seen at Spurs, why fans are getting frustrated. And they're like, well, if there's nothing on the line, let's get, and we're planning for next season already. Let's get someone in who's going to start to build something that we can get behind again. The come in and instant win manager tactic hasn't worked. The project thing looks like it's come back a few steps. So why not start the project again? But I do understand the issues. But with that, right, it's probably time for us to call it a day. We will be back later on tonight. We're going to be recording a podcast talking about all four Champions League games. That will also be out on YouTube probably around midnight UK time. So 7 p.m. on the East Coast and 4 p.m. on the West Coast. There you go. Quick maths in my head here. It'll also be on, obviously, the feeds. For now, though, thank you so much to all of you for watching. Thank you all for all of your comments and questions as well. Thank you so much to the Rank God, Mr. Sam Tai.
Nice one, buddy. Enjoy the action later, and I'll see you soon.
Indeed. I've been Jack Collins. This has been Ranks FC, and we'll see you very shortly. Take it easy, gang.